Hello, good morning, and welcome to Politics at Salmonans. My name is Anne McElvoy of Politico.
And my name is Sam Coates of Sky News. It's Wednesday, March the 26th, the day of Rachel Reeves' spring statement, and a day I'm pretty certain that number 10 and number 11 want forgotten as quickly as possible.
Well, rarely has a 30-minute speech, give or take, in the Commons received so much attention so long in advance. I'm not sure there is much hope of that, Sam. But we do have the full works for you today. Rachel Reeves addressing the Commons at 12:30 as soon as PMQs finishes. At 2:30, there is that Office for Budget Responsibility press conference. And at 4:30, Reeves will give her own presser. And I think that surely shows they're leaning into it, whatever it is.
You say that, but I still think that the hope in Downing Street is by Thursday evening, this story has dropped off, and whether it is the summit of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris, or whether it's some kind of deal over tariffs, that this isn't leading the bulletins. Look, what's interesting is that all along, 4 months, the Treasury wanted this pretty much to be a non-event. When it was first announced in December, the Treasury called what's happening today a spring forecast. In other words, a kind of technocratic update. At the moment the results were reviewed by their independent economic and spending watchdog was presented to Parliament, basically, and the world just moves on. But, because the Office for Budget Responsibility will today lay out how Rachel Reeves is on course to break her fiscal rules, today the Chancellor is having to come to the House to lay out details of an emergency course correction, finding 10, maybe as much as £15 billion of savings to stop this. And that is why it's been upgraded from a spring forecast to a spring statement. But it is definitely, certainly, and without doubt, not a spring budget, whatever the opposition say. Now, Rachel Reeves' back is against the wall today, and I think there's no doubt about that. But sometimes she's not that bad at that. Is this the kind of moment that she can turn around?
It's certainly a character test for Rachel Reeves, I would say, as well as a numbers one. She has shown that she is good at the dispatch box when she projects authority and that sense of Labour fiscal discipline, which we remember was so important going into the last election. That made her the undisputed Chancellor. She was the woman who knew what the British economy needed. Now she has to change, doesn't she? And she is also saying that the reason for that, we're going to hear this again and again, this mantra, the world has changed. She's looking and sounding more under pressure. And that's when chancellors really get to show their mettle and sometimes their kryptonite. So that world has changed moment, I think, will show us a different Rachel Reeves. She's going to have to sort of spread the blame about a bit, whether it's between Vladimir Putin and his expansionism or indeed Donald Trump's capricious policy. So she has to sort of change from saying, well, I've got the answers here. Trust me, take my discipline. You take that spending girdle. It's very tight. It squeezes your internal organs. So anybody who's ever worn a girdle will know what that means. But it is not what she started out saying. And I am interested in how she handles this in communication terms, that going to that security chancellor mode, making excuses and just saying, hey, I have to do these things because of the world, is going to need a different tone. I think if she just continues as a sort of chancellor bot, I think she will come under a lot of pressure in her delivery as well as what she delivers. It's
interesting, isn't it? Because, as you say, and from the overnight trail, so we know this because they've leaked us a few of the words that she'll say in the Commons, she will make the case that the world has changed. But I think the criticism is that she hasn't changed enough. She is still sticking to her very aggressive, self-imposed borrowing limits. She is still sticking to those promises that tax cannot go up in many of the areas that would raise the most money, and money is incredibly tight. So the world has changed, but Rachel Reeves hasn't, but she's forcing everyone else's life worse as a consequence. He's sort of, that's the opening. That'll be the kind of criticism that's muttered on the Labour backbenches and around the cabinet table, I think.
Now, there were developments overnight that weren't exactly great for the Chancellor. So, Sam, do you want to give us the real call of horror?
Yeah, no, strong and stable is not what it felt like as I was standing outside number 11 last night. So, The backdrop, as we know, is that with lower growth than we saw in the budget in October and higher borrowing costs than we saw in the budget in October, because she's on course to miss her fiscal rules, she's going to find 10 to 15 billion pounds. And broadly speaking, Anne, because we've talked about it so many times on this podcast, we broadly know how she's going to do that. She's going to squeeze government spending. It's going to be painful. Some people worry it's too close to austerity or austerity light. There are accounting tricks that she can do. But there's also this big welfare package, the squeeze on the incredibly ballooning welfare budget, particularly focusing on the disabled. Now, last week, the Work and Pension Secretary outlined what they were. Liz Kendall stood up in the House of Commons and basically said, we're going to tighten the criteria for people to get on personal independence payments, and we're also going to reassess quite a lot of the people on personal independence payments to make sure that they are still eligible. And we were told this package was going to raise £5 billion. But a week on, and we've been asking for the impact assessment with all these underlying costs all week. Now we discover why we didn't get it. The problem is that ministers thought that this would save £5 billion, but the watchdog at the heart of today's proceedings, the Office for Budget Responsibility, has rejected their figures. They say the package won't save £5 billion, but £3.4 billion, creating a, if you can do your maths, £1.6 billion black hole. Now, the reason for this, and there is a dispute between ministers and the OBR, but they don't want this to go public, and they're not going to ignore what the OBR says. But the OBR seems to think that you're going to have fewer people being taken off or not coming on the PIP benefit. So it's simply not going to deliver the savings because it'll mean it's less effective than ministers and civil servants in Whitehall think. However, that disagreement as it may, the government and Rachel is having to act and find more money. And the way she will do it is by announcing today yet more welfare cuts. So today, Rachel Reeves, surprisingly, a week after one set of welfare cuts, is going to announce some more. So she's going to announce that universal credit and capacity payment benefits for new claimants, which were halved under Liz Kendall's original package, will now be frozen until 2030. There's going to be a small reduction in the basic rate of universal credit in 2029. 2029 is the year that she has to ensure that there's no borrowing for day-to-day spending. So that's the critical year at the heart of her fiscal rules that we're talking about today. And all of this raised somewhere in the region of 500 million. She'll have to get it up to that 5 billion in order to make her sums add up. But it's embarrassing to have this because this is a package that they've been working on since January, a challenge that we've known about since January. And then at the 11th hour, they're having to redo their calculations. I know that there are people in government embarrassed by this. It doesn't look great. It underscores how the whole welfare changes, which the government are saying they're doing because it's the right thing to do, really are in place because it's all a numbers game, because Rachel Reeves couldn't make the sums add up until she delved into changes to the welfare budget in order to save some cash. I think the Treasury DWP relationship is really awkward, and this last minute hitch is a good sign of that.
Just a small personal point on that. So you mentioned DWP and the Chancellor interaction. This is quite personal for Rachel Reeves because her husband, Nick Joycey, was a very senior civil servant until recently, inter alia, Sam, at DWP. He was also in the Cabinet Office and at DEFRA. And I think, in fairness, had to sort of move around a bit to make sure there was no perceived clash with his wife, who was Shadow Chancellor and was about to become Chancellor, is now off at the Blavatnik School of Government. So safely out of the way. And I do gather on background, I think that was a calculation that anything that looked difficult around her relationship, her family relationship, and what was going to happen in welfare and welfare budgets would be very, very tricky indeed. And so they made that personal decision. It's just a small example of how this cuts to the quick and how everything here, the politics, the economics, but also the perception and the emotions around it, can become very, very strong. What you were laying out there, Sam, in your magisterial look across what we're going to hear and see today, I am interested in the sort of deja vu all over again feeling, even going back before Liz Truss and that blessed era, that sense of criticism of the OBR from senior people who think it's just too strict or gets it's a bit too stern, and then often later says, well, actually, it wasn't as bad as we thought, but then the damage is done. The lack of growth. I mean, it feels very like a lot of the Tory years that we've been through, and a lot of the pain that Tory chancellors have been through, doesn't it? There was a piece by my colleague Dan Bloom and by Annabelle Dixon on the Politico site, just saying, like, what if project growth doesn't happen? And this is, I think, the nightmare that a lot of Labour ministers and MPs are waking up with, in order to get this growth going that she has always said, and Keir Starmer said, is at the heart of what Labour needs to cure the economy. Big changes are going to happen. The state is going to have to be slimmer, more productive. There's that AI and tech revolution coming, but it doesn't happen quickly. And frankly, there's a lot of Labour folk who think this is Tory 3.0 small state obsession with a bit of kind of Elon Musk dogery on top, and they don't like it.
Absolutely. Look, the idea that you're going to get growth because of some of the planning reforms, some of the pressure on Whitehall between now and the end of this year feels to me and to economists I've talked to a bit far-fetched. Yes, there could possibly be some more interest rate cuts by the Bank of England that help a bit, but the idea that that growth is going to supercharge and with it comes tax revenue feels a lot, and that really matters. Because of the big point that I want to convince you of this morning. And right, there's no doubt that there's a lot of political pain.
You sounded like a teacher there for a minute.
There'll be a test at the end to make sure you were paying attention. Look, there's no doubting the political pain that Rachel Reeves is going to have to go through today in order to find those 10 to 15 billion pounds of savings, in order to make sure she doesn't miss her fiscal rules, right? Because she's not compromising on those. But just fast forward to the end of the year when we have our budget, our proper big budget, because there's a danger that we end up in a doom loop, that we end up going through all of this again. If there isn't growth, then, she will have restored her 10, 12 billion pounds of headroom. But there's a very real risk that over the course of the next 7 months, she loses it again. Now, I've been going through all the possible reasons why, that not very big margin for error against her self-imposed borrowing limits might be eroded all over again. And here's just a few of them. We could have lower tax revenue because of the global trade war, which Trump is going to launch next week. Even if Britain avoids tariffs, that'll be at the expense of the digital services tax, which could mean a £1 billion black hole in the accounts for the next few years. So that's $1 billion out of the 10 or 12 that we get today. Another accounting anomaly that causes big pain for Rachel Reeves. In the last autumn, fuel duty was frozen again temporarily. Now, unless she finds another £3 billion for that, she's going to have to go to war with the Sun and motorists. Keir Starmer was out yesterday in the Sun saying he wouldn't harm motorists. So there's another £3 billion out of the 10 billion that you're going to have to find. You're going to have public sector pay discussions and quite possibly strikes over the summer, which are going to get ugly as public sector workers realise they're not going to get the same settlement as last year. Then there's Thames Water. If that slips into special administration, that's another $2 billion a year. And then cabinet colleagues are just going to come back for more after these very tight settlements. And finally, the OBR at some point is quite likely, I'm told by economists, just to downgrade Britain's productivity level, because it's always been quite bullish on that, and we're expecting some kind of reassessment. That's probably not today, but if it's in the autumn, that's a good 2 to 3 billion as well. So imagine a world in which, having gone through all of this today, we're doing it again in the autumn budget. At that point, she can't squeeze spending, she can't change her fiscal rules, taxes will go up.
And there again, it's deja vu over and over and over again, back to that doom loop that the Conservatives found themselves in. It's a super risky moment for the Chancellor for all the reasons that you've just mentioned there, Sam. But it is also, I think, the first big open goal the Tories have had on two fronts that could potentially give them a boost and maybe get them back into the national conversation where they want to be on things that aren't just culture wars and noises often, and the more kind of ideological, philosophical net zero conversations. So those OBR numbers look like a sign that Rachel Reeves, in essence, miscalculated risk. And that's really what headroom is about, isn't it? If you got that calculation better, you'd have more headroom. It's a pretty serious thing for a chancellor to get wrong, which isn't to say that chancellors don't get this wrong all the time, but it's definitely, it's a sort of markdown. And from that flows a lot of those other pressures that we've been talking about, the penny pinching on welfare, etc. And then having to say, I'm doing reform, but really you're doing it to save money. So it's a little bit muddy what your driver is. And what struck me was Mel Stride, the shadow chancellor, in a thread I was doom scrolling this morning. It is a guide to what the opposition talking points will be. I think he also has a piece in the Telegraph. And I think what he is saying, well, yes, the world has changed. Sure, thanks for that insight. But it's changed also in ways that you can bring to Rachel Reeves's door: growth down, government borrowing up sharply, the nuts and bolts of Chancellor decisions. And we're paying more on that pretty humongous UK debt than other countries, 4.75% yield. As he points out, Germany is under 3. Switzerland, Sam, I'm not going to make you guess, but it's 0.68, which would be very nice indeed. But the Conservatives there will say, well, Labour had its chance at the last budget and it went down the road of tax rises on businesses, and that's a big factor in stymieing the growth data. And the cyclical data does look like the UK was again more affected than other countries by that changing world. So I think that's a moment for the opposition. I mean, never say that the Conservatives at the moment will absolutely rise as one and get their act together, but they really do have an opportunity here.
Far be it from me, but until the Conservative Party has some semblance of an economic policy, and at the moment I can't detect what it is, I'm not sure that they're going to get a particularly strong hearing. Is their overriding goal to reduce the deficit, to shrink taxes? It was under Boris Johnson to level up. The Tory party hasn't had a coherent direction in a long time. And so, yes, I'm sure Mel Stride will do as good a job as he is able to lay problems at the feet of Rachel Reeves. It's still quite early on in Labour's tenure, so I think that'll only work up to a point. But I think the bigger problem is that they don't, is the Tory party sort of doesn't yet show its cards. We don't really know kind of what it would do. I think that actually imposes a ceiling on how much people will pay attention to them. Don't you think?
I kind of disagree with you on that. Can I just say that just before the alarm clock goes? I think it'd be way, way too early. I understand the point, always sort of fudges it. It's direction of travel. You need a direction of travel in a sense. And I think you're right. Yeah, it has not been Kemi Badenoch's sort of strength to pull together an economic message, but policy, like policy from the opposition, like with less than a year after the election, it would be meaningless. Where I think you get a hearing if you're Conservative and you can make some sort of coherent case, is that it's the sort of Labour isn't working line, and you put it down there now, and then you kind of build your case. And of course, if things turn around miraculously and the economy looks much better, well, that might not fly at all. That's politics. But right now, I think you'll get a hearing because there is a gap in the room where the Rachel Reeves growth plan was supposed to be.
One final word. I'm going to grab the microphone for the final word, even though the alarm's gone off. Watch this Tory sideshow. Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, versus Liz Truss. Liz Truss keeps taking to Twitter to criticise Mel Stride. I think there's a personal beef behind them. I think she blames him a bit for a bit of her downfall. But Liz Truss was saying on Twitter, look, there are people in the Labour Party questioning the role of the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, and whether really it should be sidelined. And then she says, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents, just need at Mel J. Stride. There's a big row waiting to be had on the Tory side about how they deal with economics. And Liz Truss versus Mel Stride is actually, the theatre production that I am waiting for.
Get your tickets now. The Trusser drama never ends, does it?
She hasn't listened to Kemi and she hasn't shut up. Right, that's it. Big day, so we're going to leave you to it. We will see how it landed and tell you what we made of it and what the political world made of it tomorrow morning, Thursday morning. Thank you for joining us.
See you then.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.